There have been a few opportunities that I've had in my lifetime to help people. And in those kinds of situations, I'll be asked, well, what can I ever do to thank you? And I'll say, you don't have to. I am part of a lineage of works. This is part of what being a human being is. And we're in this chain of causation with each other. And I say, I want you to just know that I'm honoring this person who went before me. And maybe someday you'll be in a position to help somebody else. And when you do, you'll be honoring all of us upstream from that.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're listening to us. This is Footprints Podcast, a podcast where we tell the stories of our elders and glean their wisdom. And today I have a very special guest that I'm bringing to us, and he is going to tell us about himself. I will not say his name, he will tell us his name. Please tell us your name and take us way back when. What were you like as a little boy? What was growing up like? What's different then from now?
Well, it seems like everything's different.
Yeah.
My name is John Taylor, and I'm recently retired, but for the last 25 years, I ran a philanthropic grant-making organization in the United States. But going back to the beginnings, I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. It was a sort of solidly middle-class kind of neighborhood. Went to public schools. There were good public schools. I was very fortunate to have great public schools and very good teachers. We lived in a place where there was some access to some forest and loved to play in the woods, make forts and things like that with my friends. I was the youngest of 3 boys in my family, and I was fortunate to have really good older brothers. But I also think that a lot of my identity had to do with my place in the family, being the youngest. Never felt quite as smart as my brothers. They were smart. They were and are people I look up to. But it was largely a very sheltered and nurturing environment to grow up in.
Mm-hmm. And so what was your first experience thinking this is what the world looks like, and then finding out that the world is not necessarily what you thought it was?
Well, it's interesting. I described where I grew up, and what I would add is it was in many ways a very closed off sort of environment. I wasn't aware of it at the time. Washington, D.C. was a city with very substantial population of color, and we lived in the suburbs that was not. It was a very white, homogeneous world. I do remember my first awareness of current events as a child was in first grade. It was in 1967, and my first grade teacher came into our classroom and told us that Martin Luther King had been killed. And she led the class in a minute of silence to honor Martin Luther King. And I think many of my classmates didn't know who Martin Luther King was. And so that was an initial prompt that there's something going on in the world beyond the comfort of our suburbs that's important and where there's contention happening. I had the experience of growing up by middle school with the knowledge that I was different in a certain way, an awareness of being gay. And that was a secret that I carried through certainly my high school years. It wasn't safe to not be secret about that. But I was able to come out when I got to college, by my sophomore year. And that sort of awareness of being on the other side of the line that defines normal and acceptable was an awareness that shifted my thinking and opened me up to thinking about other people who weren't seen as normative, who weren't seen as the ideal of what it means to be an American person. And I think it led to a little bit more questioning and a little bit more openness to recognize that there are multiple perspectives in our society. And that, I was fortunate to have a friend that we had a lot of political arguments with. And he pushed this perspective that was kind of new to me at the time, which is that being a good person goes beyond just being kind to people in one's face-to-face interactions, but it requires one to consider the ways that our actions reverberate and affect people who we might not even be in direct relationship with, that we actually are in relationship with these people because our actions do impact the larger society and they do have effects on other people. And that part of our responsibility as people is to have our eyes open about that and to be willing to take responsibility for those effects. So that was a kind of a new concept for me, but this idea about what social responsibility meant was something that I was introduced to around the same time that I was coming out. And so those two things reverberated with each other and affected my general orientation about things in the world.
Mm-hmm. Is that part of what led you to become a lawyer, or?
I wish I could
about
say.
that.
I wish I could. I wish I could say that. I left out that that my extracurricular that I loved in high school when I was a kid. It was theater. I was a theater kid, and I think I was frankly drawn to the theatrics of being a lawyer. I just thought, if you can do that, you could do this. And I also had no particular quantitative aptitude, so it meant law school was what's left if you can't, if you don't want to do chemistry, if you don't want to do chemistry and biology or anything like that.
Yes.
So, but I did dabble in what I would call some student activism when I was a kid. And I had that in mind, that being a lawyer gives you some tools to do some interesting things. And so while my initial career was not in the public interest or civil society sector, I had a career as a litigator. I was always doing sort of as a volunteer lawyer. I was active on behalf of a number of LGBT organizations in Philadelphia where I lived. So I was sort of a volunteer lawyer, volunteer activist, not a professional activist, but it was meaningful work for me. And I think it brought me into community with people who I really like being in community with.
You said not a serious activist, or professional. When did that change?
Well, I was practicing law for many years, and I knew somebody who had become very fortunate and was in a position to start doing some philanthropic giving. And this person asked me to help him. And he had a range of interests, but he was interested in supporting some local LGBT things. And so as a sort of a side thing from my legal work, I began advising this person on his philanthropy. And I have to say, it's not because I was the most immersed or the smartest or the most strategic person who could have provided advice, but we had a relationship of trust. And I don't think that it's unusual for people who are wading into philanthropy for the first time to want the comfort of working with somebody that they know and trust, even ahead of prioritizing topical expertise. And so I was asked to do this largely because I think this donor saw me as somebody that would work with him to help explore what philanthropic interests he might pursue without having an overly pre-cooked program of this is how you do it. And so I was fortunate to work with somebody who approached it with an open mind, who wanted to learn, and I was given the opportunity to go on that walk with that person. And so I remember, this started out as kind of a side thing, and then there came a time around 2000 where he said, John, we've been doing this for a while and I like the way this is going, but I really need to ramp up a structured professional organization to do this. And would you be interested in leaving your practice of law to help me with this? When I think about all the things that I was ill-suited to do, I was reasonably capable as a lawyer, but I do not like living in conflict all the time. And litigation was an odd place to want to make one's home if you just don't love being in battle all the time. So I did it, but it wasn't my comfort zone. And so when I was given the opportunity to say, would you like to move into a philanthropic role, it seemed like a no-brainer to say yes. Plus, I felt like I had, through my involvement as an amateur activist, I really had a sense of where some important needs were and where some important opportunities were, and the opportunity to explore one's way into that important world with a smart, committed philanthropic partner just seemed like an idea that couldn't be passed up.
Yeah. So what did you have to change about or learn as you were transitioning from being in and with and part of movements to now, doing work through philanthropy? What was that like?
Well, it's a very different role. And, one of the things that one always struggles with, I think everybody who is involved with philanthropy struggles with, is how do I know I'm succeeding? How do, in the business world, you are succeeding if you're making money, There's an objective measure. And in philanthropy, the goal isn't just to give away money, it's to make something happen, to make the world better with it. And I think it's one of the most difficult areas, is to really know and to measure, assess, how are we doing. But one thing I was very committed to do was to do this professionally, and to do it in a way that avoided conflict of interest, that applied appropriate independence and diligence, that the work we did, we would have systems of accountability within our own organization. And so I was really committed to building a professional organization that wasn't just everybody doing what they feel like.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. I had to build an organization, which was not something that I had to do as a lawyer. Some lawyers are managers. I wasn't.
Yeah.
So having to evolve as a manager, again, wasn't something that came naturally to me. It's something that I had to do, but being a manager was never particularly my sweet spot either. I was well supported by other people who were better at it than I was, and that allowed the overall work to succeed. I think being a philanthropist is different, or being anyone in professional philanthropy is different than being an activist. And I think it's really important to understand that when you are an activist, you're immersed in the work. You identify viscerally with the community of activists. And when you're a grant maker, a professional in philanthropy, you're serving as a bridge between that activist community, or not just activists, but communities of people doing the work. It's not just all activism. Sometimes it's social services, sometimes it's research. There are a whole bunch of different philanthropic causes or areas that one can get into. But you're, on the one hand, connected to this community of people doing important work. And then on the other hand, you're connected to a philanthropist who has an idea of what their philanthropic objective is, what their values are, what they hope to accomplish. And you're trying to create a bridge between those two things. And you have to value both of those things. Working for a private foundation, your first institutional loyalty is to the priorities adopted by the board. And hopefully they give you clear enough priorities. But most of the people in philanthropy also come from that community of activists, and they have relationships there. And they care, they see the nuance of the value of the work in a very close-up way. But they're in a different place than the donor that they're working with, who might be 2 steps removed. Yeah. And so you may be in a relationship with a large number of grantee organizations, and you have these little windows of opportunity to try to explain the work to the board, and to how does this work? How is this succeeding? What does success look like? How should we be adapting our strategy? You have to synthesize and explain the work, and you need to operate within the containing framework of an approved strategy, but you want to make sure that strategy is informed as it can be by the field and the practical experience of the people in the field. But once the strategy is adopted, you have to be faithful to the strategy and how you're making grants. So that's a very long way of saying that you have to be in very close relationship with, and at the same time somewhat at arm's length with, the field when you're a private philanthropist. Yeah. And that's a little different. There's another piece of it, which is, I know that not all philanthropic institutions are this way, but I was very fortunate to work with a donor who was very committed to the idea of, didn't need credit, didn't really want credit, felt like a donor's need to take credit and to brand every success around the donor himself actually gets in the way of collaboration, gets in the way of the field, and so was very committed to the idea that let the organizations speak for the work. We're not going to try to explain it to the world. That's their job. We weren't an advocacy organization, but we supported organizations that were both providing services, also trying to inform policy. But we were happy to take a back seat and let them have the credit where there was credit, let them explain the objectives, let them make the argument. And again, we were one step back and in close relationship, but also had to maintain some independence.
Yeah, that's a very interesting balance. So as you learn this shift, do you turn to books? Do you turn to friends? Do you turn to, who are your other teachers in this process?
I'd say what's been the most enriching is the people I've been able to be in conversation with. And also, our philanthropic institution was involved in several fields. There were points of tangency, there were points of adjacency among these fields. But what was really interesting for me was being in conversation, having a perspective that spanned a number of different fields and that allowed us to explore how you could borrow an insight that was developed in one space and see if it worked in a different space. I'll give an example, which is there was important work being done around trying to build more robust empirical evidence about how social protection spending, that many countries were committed to doing the spending. There were resources going into this, but were the resources being used in the way that maximized the benefit to the society? This is completely aligned with the goals of the governments that were committing these resources. But there's a lot to be learned about how to design these programs so that they deliver the maximum benefit. And one of the first things that we came to realize that there's a lot of ideology, the development space, where people say we should do it this way because this is the ideologically correct way to do it. But there was underappreciation of the role of empirical data and evidence, like what's actually working. And so a lane that we discovered that we could be in that space was supporting an ecosystem of organizations that were really about developing better evidence, and evidence that was responsive to questions that governments were actually struggling with. And so the work that we did in supporting that ecosystem, that approach to say, there is a significant public problem. Governments are focused on this problem. And by improving the evidence, we can actually help get something done that actually makes the lives of many, many people much, much better. So the area of gender-based violence, the field of gender-based violence and violence against children, there was a lot of good work going on in that space that was pushing for better laws, treat this as a crime. Assault is a crime. And I think that's an important part of the mix. But there was a new area of work that was looking at this as a public health issue, that gender-based violence, violence against children, is something that is happening at scale in societies. And it has tremendous burdens, not just on the individuals who are victims, but on the society and its potential as a whole. And so encouraging people to think about this as a public health problem, and then empirically, with rigorous evidence, rigorous evaluation, exploring approaches to preventing intimate partner violence, violence against children through approaches like adapting social norms I'm not talking about just sort of sensitization campaigns, but shifting people's perspectives about what's normal, what's acceptable in society has an effect on how people themselves behave. Taking things out of the shadows and trying to strengthen social norms that when you see something happening next door, that's something that the community has an interest in. And so that's just an example of borrowing from one field in one program and trying it in another program in ways that really work. And there are many, many examples of that kind of thing. And so having the privilege of being involved in these different spaces, in conversations with these brilliant people doing brilliant work across these different fields, and having the opportunity to sort of cross-pollinate and to take a tried and strong idea from one place and try it in a different place, and then actually to see it happen, to see it work, that was extremely rewarding.
Yeah. And how does Africa come into the picture for you?
Well, I had my first visit to Africa very early in my career doing philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very fortunate to have a donor who was interested in issues beyond the United States. And so our programs were involved not just with US civil society, but in a number of social justice and development type areas of work internationally and in different regions. Africa is an incredible place to work. It's not, I can't speak for the continent, but I can speak for what my experience in East Africa was, which is where I had there's a vibrant civil society. There are good people in government, in ministries, who are in constructive conversation with their civil societies. When we were starting, what we were looking for was areas where there was both strong need and strong opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so we did this big analysis of all these countries where we could be working. We were willing to explore and be open to a number of different contexts, but we thought ultimately we're going to have to make some choices and decide where to focus, because it makes a difference knowing the environment where you are and having some committed resources on the ground to help inform your work and to have an understanding of the context of the work. We looked at a bunch of indicators that Human Development Index, and there are a whole bunch of indices, and you can still look at these things. Yeah. And there were high indices of need. And then we also looked at, well, where is there a robust civil society where there's good organizations doing the work, enabling conditions for the work? And we wanted to do the work in places where maybe other people might see it as too challenging and they wouldn't go there. But we wanted to be able to stand on work that was already being done and to be able to work with people who are committed in the context, who were of and from the context, and who were creative within the context. And we found that in East Africa, where we felt like there was certainly a lot of need, but there was also terrific opportunity. And a lot of the opportunity came from the quality of the civil society leaders that we were able to find there.
When you look back, having grown up, started your career in one place and then ended up doing, working in philanthropy for 25 years, are there things that take you even beyond that time that for you thread where you landed in philanthropy?
I'll take a swing at this. I'm not sure I'm getting this right, but ultimately, people want to live a good life. They want to be good people. For me, that means living in a way that expresses love of not just particular individuals, but love of humanity.
Yeah. Which is what philanthropy is.
Exactly. Yeah. It's love of humanity. And I think that there's a sort of a spiritual dimension to this journey. And to be in conversation with people who don't just do this as a job, but who do this because this is their life, who act with courage and pay a price, or are willing to pay a price for acting with courage in the service of a world where people are better supported to meet their potential. I think you learn a lot from being in conversation with people like that. One of the sort of corrupting things when you're in philanthropy is I used to make a joke about it, which is, once you're a grant maker, all of your jokes are funny, and people treat you like you're an interesting person, and people treat you like everything you say is sort of interesting and smart. It's because of the power imbalance, frankly, and it can be corrupting, to have everybody treat you like you're smart. Nobody wants to argue with you. And so when you step away from it, at some level, you're wondering, what's it going to feel like not to have this, not to be clothed in this importance anymore? And I'm finding I'm fine with it. I'm really fine with going back to being a person without a big portfolio of grants to manage. And so it allows me to re-enter. It allows me to go back to just being a sort of a citizen, hopefully an active citizen, with some of the lessons that I've learned, but without this checkbook behind me. But it also allows me to try to live in balance in ways that I've seen and admired in some of the more resilient and smart civil society leaders that I've been in contact with.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what keeps you grounded through doing all this work. And as you answer that too, it's, now life has shifted. You're in a moment of transition. And Footprints was also started to talk to our elders about transitions and how to manage them. I know it's very early days for you.
Well,
but what are you learning? What are you experiencing with that?
Well, so far, I'm very happily still in conversation with many of the people that I worked with. I'm in this city a few days, a week normally, and I'm having lunch with people, and they're not asking me for money anymore. So it's nice to just be in conversation and to kick ideas around. And I always felt at some level that the role that I was in was like wearing a suit that's just a little too big, floppy sleeves, big shoulders. It was a big suit to wear, and I'm actually happy to be in my right-sized clothing again. And I've gotten a new dog 2 days ago, and she's going to be a handful. And I've started my spring pruning. So being close to nature is something that is always something that's been important to me, and it's something that I'll have a little more time for now, being closer to nature, to the gardens, to the rhythm of my garden, and this adventure of taking on a new pup. But I also, the work of trying to advance social justice in the world, and by that I mean trying to influence systems and institutions to allow for greater human agency, to respect the dignity of people, to manifest the kind of care and consideration that individuals are encouraged to manifest towards each other. That's to me what social justice is, sort of like decency at an institutional level. And I'm still deeply committed to that. And I'll be looking for ways to advance that in a right-sized way as a person without a grant-making portfolio.
So what I'm hearing from you is that it ends, but it doesn't end. There are new adventures.
There are absolutely new adventures.
And there's still ways to contribute, but now in a different phase of life.
Absolutely. And I'm very much looking forward to that. And I do feel that there's not really a neat bifurcation between, and there shouldn't be a bifurcation between one's professional, I do this as a job, and then I do this whole other set of things as a person. I mean, I think a lot of us live that way, and all of us probably feel like we live that way sometimes. But I really think it's healthy to try to do one's job as the kind of person one wants to be. And if the job doesn't allow that, you have to bend the job to allow it, or you have to find a different job. And this bifurcation sort of goes away when you're retired. You don't have this dual identity. But there's a lot I learned from my work, and I think it'll continue to inform the kind of person I hope to be in the remaining time of my life. And I'm excited about the new chapter. I really am.
I want to land it here.
Okay.
But I also do want to, just as the final landing, there's something you said yesterday when we were in conversation about legacies of kindness.
Yeah.
And how before us, there's something that in a way connected to and lent itself to who we are as we work in philanthropy and beyond philanthropy. So what is that for you?
I would love to share this. I would love to share this story.
Please do.
I would love to share this story.
Yes.
So the story that I was sharing with you yesterday was my grandfather, who was born in the late 1800s. His father died when he was very young, and they were poor. His mother was an immigrant who was not literate, and she was left with 2 boys, and she had to take in sewing. And my grandfather had to leave school. He was 7 years old. He had to leave school, and he had to take on 3 jobs. He delivered newspapers, he set up pins in a bowling alley, and he caddied at a golf course. And he was sort of saved by a golfer who he caddied for, who would give him books to read. And as they walked around the golf course, this guy would discuss the books with my grandfather and ask him questions about the books. And he taught him he gave him a dictionary and encouraged him to look up words he didn't know, and told him if you come across a word, look it up. And if you use it 3 times in conversation within a day after looking up, that word is yours forever. It's a part of you forever. And so my grandfather, with this very informal support of this person who had no particular obligation to my grandfather, began to lay the foundations for his own education. And he ended up getting a correspondence, kind of a GED, and then an associate's degree. And he became a successful person. He became a very successful person. I don't mean like captain of industry, but he emerged to a comfortable life where he could send his daughters to college, and he provided for his wife. And I think about that person, that golfer, whose name I don't know. I asked my mother, when she was still alive, do you know anything about, other than that story, do you know who this person was? And she said, I never knew his name. But this person put not just this little boy, but a whole family, a whole lineage on a different path than it would have been on if he hadn't done that. And so there have been a few opportunities that I've had in my lifetime to help people. And in those kinds of situations, I'll be asked, well, what can I ever do to thank you? Yeah. And I'll say, you don't have to. I am part of a lineage of works. We all have our sort of genetic lineage, our family lineage, but we also are a part of a lineage of works that all of us probably could find these stories. People who are outside of our family line, but who intervened in some way through some act of kindness or generosity or just extending themselves, bent the arc, not just for the person they were helping, but for everyone who came after. I guess you could think about it in terms of like, I have an obligation because of this, and I guess I do. But I think of it as a privilege to be a part of, this is part of what being a human being is. And we're in this chain of causation with each other. When I talked earlier about social responsibility, it means like recognizing that the things we do have effects on other people, even if they're in a value chain. Like they're in another country, they're just making a product. But the choices we make affect other people. And that part of being a human being means we take responsibility for it. But we're also part of these lineages of works. And I just think there's something beautiful about that. There's an intergenerational connection between these things. And so I've shared that story with people I've helped when they try to thank me. And I say, I want you to just know that I'm honoring this person who went before me. And maybe someday you'll be in a position to help somebody else. And when you do, you'll be honoring all of us upstream from that. And that's enough. That's just enough for me. So it's a story I like.
Yeah. And dear listeners, that's enough from us. The place I'm landing it as I listen to John, and I'm sure you will also land where you need to land, is the gift it is that we're not alone and new adventures await us. And I hope that as you think about your transition as a leader, that you will also embrace your lineage of good works, but also the adventures that await you. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you again on Footprints when we bring you yet another guest. John, thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a privilege to talk to you.